See a lot of friends with us here today. So we're going to get started. I'm going to transfer you to our host, Marc Alessi.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tesla Unwired. Today, we're going to explore how to transform your work through play for breakthrough results. My name is Marc Alessi. I'm the Executive Director of the Tesla Science Center. And today, our featured guest is Dr. John Cohn. I had the privilege of meeting John when I was a speaker at last year's South by Southwest conference in Austin, Texas. John came to the conference and came to my talk, introduced himself, and showed me a Tesla coil he had built. But the more we spoke, the more I knew that John was somebody that just had to get involved with Tesla and become an advisor for us. I want him to advise us on everything from the launch of the Museum and Science Center to our programming in STEM and entrepreneurship. John is an IBM Fellow in the MIT IBM Watson AI Research Group based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. John holds a BSEE from MIT and a PhD in computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. He has authored more than 40 technical papers, contributed to 4 books, and has over 120 worldwide patents. He's a fellow of the IEEE for contributions to high-speed integrated circuit design, and he's very active in education issues at the local, state, and national level. He is so passionate about promoting STEM careers that he spent 59 days living and inventing in an abandoned steel mill as part of the Discovery Channel's technical survival show, The Colony. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Cohn. John, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Mark, it's great to see you. It really is. It was such a fantastic, I loved hearing that meeting story because, you know, I happened to be, I had a Tesla coil with me when I met you and you were giving a talk on Tesla and I said, this is going to go somewhere. And who would have thought? But it's great to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, we've had a chance, you know, since Austin, we've gotten together many times, both in person, over the phone, and been very grateful for all the advice you've given us, especially on the education programming. But we never had a chance to fully delve into all the work that you do. And the staff and I, as we got to know you and we Googled you and watched some of the YouTube videos, we've been blown away by some of the work and some of what you've done. And we were hoping that you'd give us a presentation on integrating play to be more successful at work or to unlock your creative potential. And I hope you don't mind if I, you know, interrupt you from time to time as you give that presentation.
Pretty interesting. You know, I was kind of under the impression that we were just going to talk about it.
Okay, well,
so
if
that,
you can,
that would be
a little bit.
Yeah, I could do your presentation. Just
well, tell me a little bit about, you know, where this came from, the talks that you've given on integrating play into work.
Well, you know what, I'm gonna strip here a little bit, but you know, even, you know, I think it's actually, I wanted to just kind of as an intro to the topic, you know, these are really tough times. You know, I've been around a long time. You know, I will have been at IBM 39 years this August. So in a couple of weeks, I will have been 39 years. And I can honestly say, I don't think I've ever seen a more challenging time, you know, whether it's the economics, whether it's the politics, but obviously, you know, the pandemic itself. And what, I guess the message, you know, I can take you through a good story, if you don't mind, if you give me a second. But I think that this insight that play is really gonna, you know, even at the hardest times, you got to play. So of course, in that spirit, the last day or two, I made this, which is basically, I kind of got tired of looking at people and going, are they smiling? Are they talking? So anyway, just like I said, you know, and when it the rougher it gets, the weirder you got to be. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean that, you know, that you just gotta figure out a way of playing in a, you know, let me tell you a story, but at first I gotta go find it. Anybody know any good play jokes while I'm doing this? Hang on.
Good jokes.
But the actual story on this is deeply personal, and if you want, I can start to take you through it, and you can interrupt me if you'd like, and
Okay,
we can take it from there. Okay, but I just want to say how. Let's see. Am I able to share? Can I? So if I go in and I do
co-host, etc.
I think you have to enable me to share.
Yes, you're a co-host, John, so you can go ahead and share.
Okay. So what I kind of want to talk about, my path to why play is such a potent kind of a force, and especially in times like these. So just to kind of introduce myself a little bit, that was a great introduction. I kind of listened to that, and it sounds a little dry, but I think if I were really going to be, I have to say, I'm a nerd, and very proud of it. I grew up, to the extent that I did grow up, in Houston, Texas. And when I was 8 years old, my mom found a piece of paper the other day that said I wanted to go to MIT and I wanted to be an engineer. And I was lucky enough to get those kind of those wishes. And honestly, in my life, as I was telling you before we got on here, I will have been at this company for 39 years by August of this year. But I want to introduce you to a couple other people, as I kind of go on, because I think it's important to my story. This is my late father-in-law, Gabriel Mariano. And he was also he also worked at IBM. So I worked there 39 years. He worked there 36 years. And he was a really amazing mechanical engineer, but he was self-taught. He was actually hired right out of high school into what was then IBM College. And they taught him to be an engineer. He was a fabulous engineer. And aside from him using English measure and me using metric, we agreed on everything. We loved making things. He actually built these very cool devices. They were these giant robotic machines for building computers. They were like made out of granite and steel and hydraulics. They actually put together the computers that I actually learned on. So we talk about all those things. So he was always making things until the day he died. He was making things. But the thing he made that I really like is my wife. He made my wife, Diane, who's an engineer, a physicist, actually, by training with a graduate degree in engineering. And she also worked at IBM for 8 years. And though I'm a big fan of IBM, I got to say, I'm not going to try to sell you on any one particular company, but I will say, wherever you work, you should make sure that, issuing someone a spouse is a very good corporate policy. I've found that that's worked out. But between us, this year, as of August, we will have had 83 years of the same company and the same industry. And it was kind of weird. You asked me about why play. So indulge me for a couple of seconds. I'm going to go in a different direction, and then I'll get back to play because I'll explain why. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Well, so my particular field, I feel like grandpa going, my first 30 years. But my first 30 years of working at IBM was a really interesting exercise, because I had like a front row seat at the creation of basically modern computing. You've heard of Moore's Law. Is that right? You guys all know about that, right? And actually it was Moore's observation. Moore just noticed that things got faster and cheaper. And we like to call it Dennard's law, because that's actually the math behind it. But being in chip design for a long time has really taught me a lot. And it fundamentally actually taught me about play. And here's the connection eventually. But, Moore's law basically says that speeds double every 3 years, and the density quadruples every year and a half, something like that. But if you actually look back over 100 years, and it turns out that IBM, I keep talking about my company. Sorry, it's the only job I ever had. But in 2011, the company turned 100 years, and I had to go around giving a lot of talks about the history of electronics. That was my job. And I had to do it because I was the oldest and certainly the funniest looking person in my company in the state of Vermont. I live in northern Vermont. I had to go talk to the governor. And there was this article in the newspaper that morning. It said 100 years, and it had me kind of holding a big wafer in my hand. I saw the governor, who's a really funny guy and a good friend of mine at the time. And he said, "John, I didn't even think you were 80. And I was like, what we were there to tell him about was how technology had changed over the years. So not just over 20 years, 30 years, but over 100 years, the life of the company, the life of the industry. And basically it kind of dug up some data that said, how much compute could you buy if you went back 100 years? When my company started, we were doing compute using mechanical computation. We had scales that would tell you like how much, if you bought 3 ounces of cheese, how much would it cost? How much should it cost? And then we eventually motorized them. We had electromechanical, where we actually put motors on things that did mechanical. And then vacuum tubes, which is what I actually studied, was kind of fading out when I was at MIT in the 70s. And then discrete transistors, that's what my father-in-law worked on. And then integrated circuits. If you look at how much compute you could buy for the same amount of money, adjusted, it goes up like this. And this is a really an amazing thing. And it looks like it's really smooth, but it's actually not smooth at all. It's these kind of sort of smooth things with these like horrible discontinuities. And that is like when something that was going to work didn't work before. And it was really interesting. Like if I kind of get around the 1980s, about the time I entered the industry, we were making these computers out of bipolar transistors, the kind of stuff that my father-in-law worked on. And they were getting faster. We were making the best computers in the world, not just IBM, but IBM and a bunch of other companies. The interesting thing is that they start to get too hot. They melt or catch fire. And we used to say, well, marketing can take care of that. But eventually you had to do something different. And these kind of leaps were something that you were doing, stops working, where you just turn in the crank, it's kind of the continuous. Those are the smooth things. And then these like, moments where something stops working, those discontinuities, those really define the industries when something stops working. If you look like around 1980, where we were on a really good path of making faster computers, but we got into this bind where they were just using so much power. We had to take a leap and actually switch to a completely untested technology. At the time, it's called CMOS, or it's still called CMOS. But if you notice, we actually had to get the next generation's computers had to be slower. Now, why does this have something to do with play? Well, it's kind of a funny thing because play, it's about taking leaps. When you're met with a decision that you just can't, you can't just keep doing what you're doing. The companies, and I would argue the people who kind of figure out, well, you know what, I'm just going to leap across that. If you go too soon, you might, you're taking too much risk. But if you wait, and like companies like, Nixdorf or Honeywell, great companies, or, Xerox that used to make computers, couldn't quite make those leaps. They exited the business and then went on to do other great things. On the same token, the companies that went too early went bust. So it's kind of this notion of how do we actually handle this sort of challenge, when things are changing. It was interesting because there was actually an article in the Economist a little while ago where they were looking at those kind of disruptive innovations, and they actually used something else. They used a razor. It's a thing for like taking the hair off of your face, which I can't figure out why.
You've heard of those, right?
Yeah. And actually that was a great business model because they came up with this thing, and the idea was to to give you this nice handle, but then charge you for the razor blades. And that worked for 98 years until their competitor came up with something and said, 1 blade's good, 2 blades is good, must be better. And then it started this war. And the Economist was saying, at what point do you have to disrupt? They actually, back and forth, Gillette and their competitors went.
What are they up to now? Like 10 blades on one razor, I think?
Yeah, they went to the Quattro Fusion, which I thought was a joke, but I actually found one in the airport commissary in Finland last year. But that's exactly the question. Is the Economist was going, it was 14, that was the fundamental limit. But the basic point is this, and this goes back to play. You see that? That's how my industry did. Well, I kind of had this weird moment. This is a long-winded way of answering your question. So I was trying to figure out how to explain that, because I got, when you get thrown into a situation like this and somebody asks you a question, you're like, what is the main thing that has made your career happy, fun, profitable, blah, blah, blah. I got asked to do that in a really scary place because our youngest son, Gabe, he asked me to give the talk at their honors high school kind of event. And, that's a scary thing, because we live in a town of 2,000 people. And if you suck in the high school, and you give a really bad talk, then it sticks. So I was trying to figure out, well, what was that message? And it was really pretty interesting, because what I actually did is I applied this thinking of these disruptions, et cetera. Everybody's, maybe it's not how in our lives, it's not how fast you go, but it might be how much fun you're having in your career and how much money you have and how much responsibility. And, I kind of reviewed my own life and, like, where should I go to school? How many kids should I have? Who I married, which of course I have an IBM issued wife. Where should I go to grad school? Should I get a tattoo of my company in a place I can't show people? That's true, by the way. But I'll tell you a little bit later in our conversation, even when really bad things happen, I looked back. Or should you be on a reality show? I looked back, and the times that I was most stressed, and again, I think this is one of the most stressful times I've ever, seen in the world. When I was most stressed, the times I was most playful, and I don't mean necessarily happy. Playful and happy are not necessarily the same things. I can't say that I'm really happy right now. The world is kind of in a mess. But I would say that if you react to it in a kind of a playful way, that I look back over 40 years, I talk to my senior peers, not just technical people, but lawyers, et cetera, that when you actually dig back into that thing that actually got you to be whatever you are, for me, it's an engineer, it might be a lawyer, it might be an accountant, it might be a musician, but that sort of hands-on, I'm going to take a risk. I don't care who's watching. I don't care if I'm stealing ideas from somebody. I don't care if they're stealing ideas from me. I'm not thinking about the outcome. I'm kind of in the zone. Hey, I may make a mistake. That we learn as a kid. It turns out that if you're not careful, life just gets in the way, and it chases that playful thing out of you. And what I found, and we can talk about how I can tell you a couple of specific examples of how this is. But the times that I reacted in a playful way, that I meant, even though it could have been the hardest times, and I'll tell you some hard stories in a second if you want, if that's where you want to go. But the times that I reacted in a playful way rather than a fearful way, I kind of leaned into love, I leaned into play, I was most successful. I was most happy.
Interesting.
I was most creative. Those patents that I was talking about, I have a plot somewhere that actually correlates the number of patents to the amount of stress I had. Now, you might say, well, of course, you were working the hardest, but they were actually the times I was playing the hardest. So, long answer to a short question.
Well, I'll tell you,
I can go on and tell you some specific things, or how do you want to do this?
Well, just a couple of questions, but I do want you to go on. But it sounds like, I'm relating it to sitting in a meeting that is droning on and you're trying to find a solution. And usually that solution presents itself when people start getting silly and going outside the box, but saying something half jokingly and somebody else picking up on it and saying, wait a second, that isn't that crazy.
It's funny. And there is a whole lot of conversation on this topic. And I think, I'll be a little bit curmudgeonly, here I am talking about play, but I'll even say that they're forced play. So, there's different types of play. There is the, go around, come home, go fishing or go play football with your kids, work-life balance. I hear that that's really good. I've never really tried it, but that's a kind of play that's for your mental health you should do. But there's a kind of forced play, and I recognize you're asking a really good question, is like, where do you go with this? There's the thought that if you have Nerf guns on your desk, or, you have funny red noses, that somehow that will, help loosen things up. And in a way it does. But I think it's not so much about being silly. It's not so much about work-life balance. Both of those have a place, but it's really going down to a certain point of kind of misbehavior and mischief that sort of drove us. I mean, probably if you're on this call, you probably were like us. You were probably kind of nerdy and you would take things apart when you were a kid. And it was probably several years before you were able to put them back together, and successfully, maybe, hopefully. But the idea of actually going back to that place where you are making time to get hands-on. And I think if anything, it comes down to, and I think the idea of when you get silly, the thing that you were saying, is that I think that we can get really tied up in the worry about, in worry, in fear, you know,
Right.
in terms of, you know, hey, I can't afford to make a mistake. You know, if I don't get this chip done, I won't get that deal done. And if I don't get the deal done, I won't get the promotion. If I don't get the promotion, I won't get the raise. If I don't get the raise, I won't marry that girl or guy or whatever. And then I won't have those kids and I'll end up living in a ditch. And we get so tied down to fear of what might happen. And I think that silliness is part of it, but I think it's really this notion of fearlessness that comes with play, where I'm going to spend some time doing this, and I don't mind if I make mistakes. I may not celebrate that I make mistakes. I don't care who's watching. I'm doing this for myself. I'm kind of in I think that the psychological literature calls, I'm in the flow. So I have, I know that, people have always asked me, so, what are the tools to go and play? I think there's only one tool that really works. It has nothing to do with Nerf guns or plush toys, though they may help. They may help loosen things up. It's kind of a personal commitment that playfulness, that playfulness that we have as a kid that tends to get chased out of us because of financial responsibility and family responsibility and all the kind of stuff, and civic duty and blah, 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 that always stacks up, that chokes it out. Because there's no meter on life that says you're only going to, that everything you're asked to do is going to fill perfectly the 90% of your life and you'll have 10% for leisure or whatever. There are more demands on us than would ever be satisfiable. So I think the main tool is that internal barometer, that when it gets too far away from that playful spirit, that you recommit to it. And one of the real insights that I found about that, Mark, is that, that really requires you to misbehave. When I think about some of the best things that I've done in my life, best in the sense of most satisfying, and also best from the standpoint of, innovation for the world or the company. And, I think we all have done that, but those are things that I did while I was supposed to be doing something else. So I think the main tool is that barometer to know when you're spending too much time doing what you should do, because nobody really gets very far if you just do what you should do. But being able to make that time to go do what you're not supposed to do, just to try it out. And, those were the places where I know my main innovations came from. I know a lot of my peers. I'm kind of curious to hear from other people whether that resonates with them. But if you're, so you need to be able to make that time and kind of blow off, there's no magic number. I mean, there's famously, like, some companies like Google said to their employees, you have to have 15% fun, or, 15% of these side projects. That doesn't work, because
That's like Weird Al Yankovic's mandatory fun.
Yeah, exactly. If you make anything, and love life, cooking, TV, anything you make into a job is a job. So I don't think you can overly mandate it, but you can always retreat into it. So as a matter of fact, today is a really stressful day for me work-wise. And I was so happy to be able to come out here in the shop and talk to you. It's absolutely, if my management, I hope they're not listening, if they knew that I was spending all this time doing it, I'd probably get in trouble, but who cares?
That's fearless.
Well, it's not just fearless. It's, you never get away from fear, but you just don't get stopped by it.
Right.
It's funny about it. It's kind of a pretty meta thing, but when I was thinking about that message, I kind of looked back at those times that I was most creative and having the most fun and also working the hardest. Totally ironically, that a good number of them were about something not just indirectly related to play, but directly. I had this really good fortune to be working on the fastest chips, that existed from the sort of mid 90s to the, late 2000s. And ironically, these were video games. Some of the chips, and I worked on it with teams of, hundreds of really smart people, and I had a really fun role in it. But this is like Nintendo Wii in the upper left, PlayStation 3 up in the upper right, Xbox 360 in the lower left, and this is the P7 chip that was in jeopardy. Those were 4 of my big projects that I worked on, again, with lots of other people. And they were the most stressful kinds of things. I remember having a legitimate conversation, a real conversation with some friends who were associated with the Xbox project to see if we could prevail upon Mr. Gates at the time to see if we could delay Christmas a couple of weeks. It was pretty intense. But think about it, that these were the times I remember when we were working on the PlayStation, we were competing to see who had gotten the least sleep. It was really something as crazy as that. And, we were trying to make it light. We would answer the phone to our designers who were our customers at the time, and we would answer in funny voices. And, I remember, making up funny voices to answer, and realizing, got caught in the middle and figuring out what accent was I using. It was pretty funny. But all of this technology was designed ultimately to be fun. And in even ironically, that the technology that these video games drove, entertainment of one form or another, whether it's movies, games, what have you, have driven more in the advancement of technology, how fast chips work, how small they are, how much memory they have, and specifically just the whole notion of graphics acceleration, like these units here on the PlayStation 3, those are the precursors. Those are the earliest forms of commercial graphics processing units, GPUs, or tensor processing unit, TPUs, which are behind the AI stuff, which ironically is what I do today. So it's kind of funny how, not only does play fuel creativity, but, technology fuels play, technology fuels play. So
the need for play creates a market for innovation that drives technology. The need for that video game and the desire for that, and for that improved performance. Now those GPUs are used in medical imaging and are saving lives.
Or AI. Everything AI related is done using those, using GPUs. As a matter of fact, it's mostly about GPUs these days.
I'll tell you, you reminded me of one of my favorite movies growing up, Big. How Tom Hanks gets a job working for a toy company, and ends up in the boardroom, and they're showing pie charts, and he's looking at the toys, and he's like, I don't get it. This isn't fun. And turned the company on its head, but ended up helping launch a very successful product because
I really, that movie changed my life. As a matter of fact, upstairs in my house, it's I have a 1/6 of a 30-foot keyboard that I made for the bass player of the band Fish. I don't know if you're a jam band.
That is awesome. I did not know that.
And its working title was Big, and it used to tour around with them. And now I'm making it into something more fun that somebody can have in their basement. But that was such a fabulous. I love that experience.
That is very cool. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I could keep talking about how this thread went, or what would you like to do?
Yeah, no, please proceed.
Well, so, this idea of keeping this amount of time to play and actually playing when it's hardest. What I was talking about, these, nice continuous things where your life is going great, and then these discontinuities. Sometimes they're things you can choose, like where do you want to go to grad school or what have you, or, should I buy that house? Should I change jobs? And sometimes they're really hard things. And I think, you can look at, the current crisis that we're in, whether you look at it from a health or economy or social justice, those are really hard things. And I had mentioned, I think playfulness has a huge role there, whether you're doing something silly like this or you're doing something more fundamental. And if I can, I'd like to tell you a story that's a little bit more personal and honestly, pretty hard to hear. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
So,
Okay.
so I think that, you never really know where things are going to go. And I found myself a couple years ago in a laboratory in Almaden, California, at a friend's lab. I had 2 6-packs of beer, a bunch of bad country western music, and I had a task there. Now, one of the things I love about my industry and I love about my company is, there are so, to say someone's an engineer is like saying they're a human. There's so many different flavors and brands. And like in my own company, you can, this morning, I was talking to a particle physicist. I was talking to an economist. I know an ethnomusicologist. We even have a corporate comedian. There's all these different resources, and whatever your organization, probably, if you really stop and listen, what's on somebody's badge is only a shadow of what they are totally. But I had gone out to see my friend Don, who had a really cool device for moving atoms around. Now, this picture here on the lower left is a pretty famous thing. It actually was from 1998. And at the time, and maybe as far as I know, it might still be, it was the world's smallest advertisement. These guys came up with a technology for moving individual atoms. Those are xenon atoms. I believe it's like 18 xenon atoms, or somebody count real quick. But it's on a piece of copper that was at about 4 degrees Kelvin. And they came up with this thing called atomic force microscopy that uses tunneling currents to be able to not only image atoms, so it was one of the first technologies where you could almost directly image something down at an atomic level. So really, it's kind of hard to believe that before 1998, nobody ever really, quote, you can't see an atom because it's smaller than the wavelength of light, but, that the only ways that we had for sort of looking at how atoms work was kind of indirectly, like how they scattered stuff. This was the closest thing that actually said, hey, I can localize that atom. And these guys wrote the first thing they wrote, from what I understand, I don't know if it's really true. First thing you do whenever you have piece of technology like this, $15 million thing, is you write dirty words. After they got that out of their system, they wrote IBM. But I was there. It was interesting because the guys who actually invented this in Zurich, the first time I met this guy, I was at a meeting and he was telling me, he asked me what I did, and I told him about chips and game chips and stuff like that. And he said, I asked him, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I move. He's a very nice Swiss guy. Oh, you should never do a foreign accent, because when you hear somebody do an American accent, he said, I learned how to move atoms around. And I said, oh man, I heard somebody won a Nobel Prize for that. He goes, yes, it was me. And I was like, but this was one of his proteges, and I was down in the lab, and the machine there had been used. I don't know if you can you see that video, Mark?
Yes. Yeah.
So they actually made the world's first stop motion video. Those are individual atoms. This is called A Boy and His Atom, and it was done very painstakingly. So I really was curious about this. How can I, why was I there? Well, I'll tell you, and this is where the story gets quite hard, and I hope it's okay for me to do that. I mentioned in passing that some decisions you get to choose and some you don't. IBM issued me a wife, but they had nothing to do with us having 3 beautiful kids. The one on the far right, the youngest one, is Gabe. He's now 25 and is doing his qualifying exams in cancer biology at Oregon Health and Science. The middle one is the oldest. Max turned 32 yesterday and is a maker. He loves making things. It's very, very nice. Those 2 kids have gone into science. He works at a place called Meow Wolf. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's an indoor technology park in Santa Fe that's opening in Las Vegas and Denver. And so he spends his time. He uses a 5,000 watt laser to make cool stuff. It's pretty cool. But so they're both doing well. Our middle child, who was on my left, the long hair, Sam, when he was 14 years old, he was visiting friends in 2006. He was visiting friends down in Florida, and they were out late at night, and they stepped off of a curb, and a car swerved to avoid Sam's friend and hit Sam. And he was on vacation, and we got that phone call, and his soul left his body instantly. You know, he was a strong kid, and we had to go down there and make, you know, a very hard but easy decision. That his organs saved 4 people's lives, and it was you know, something you don't think will ever happen in your life. And you know, I hope it never happens in any of your lives. And you might say, wait, are we talking about play? And I know it's hard to take this in, but the reason I was there in this laboratory, which was several years later, was because I wanted to go make so we started making these rocks. I'll tell you about that in a second, with Sam's name on it. And I just started doing that in as many different ways as I could. And I was there with 2 6-packs of beer, bad music, and a $15 million machine, and crying and laughing. For 3 hours, I moved, that's 33 carbon monoxide molecules, so, because we didn't have xenon, on a piece of copper. The technology had evolved enough. This is at about 40 millikelvin. And I was able to make, well, if anybody was keeping track, probably the world's smallest memorial. But it was this very playful, it was fun. And the reason we were doing that, and here I was using all this technology, but it turned out that when it's the hardest, I found out that this is when you had to play the most. And I think this is very timely for right now, when things are coming at us all different times. After Sam died, we started making these stones. They're called Sam stones, so they have Sam's name on them. We used to make them out of rocks and you know, machine them out of rocks using sandblasting, et cetera. They were beautiful, and we would give them to people, but they're very labor intensive. So a friend of ours who's a potter helped us come up with a fairly, you know, it's still manual, but we basically have a stamp that we can put his name on the front, and a stamp with our website, which is samstones.org. And you can go look at samstones.org. This was during one of the hardest periods of my life, and I would imagine, you know, I think you can understand it's a hard time. But yeah. I took the time to go teach myself PHP and WordPress, 2 really horrible technologies, because when we started making these stones, and that was back in 2006, and what is that? That is, gosh, 14 years ago, we started giving these out. And at this point, there are 50,000, including several hidden on the Tesla at the Wardenclyffe site.
Well, I have to tell you, one was uncovered by our staff. So you shared the story, and for our audience, Dr. Cohn was across the pond or across the sound from Long Island, and being he was that close to the lab, he really wanted to see it. He drove probably 13 hours, came in driving rain, and got to tour the site. And then told me the story of his son Sam, and when he left one of the rocks, or 2 of the rocks, or more on the site, I eventually told my staff, probably about 3 weeks ago when we started to plan this call, and one of our staff people, Debbie, was like, I saw one of those rocks, and I knew that it had to be special, and there had to be a story behind it. So
that's
it's pretty
awesome.
Leaving it with us.
Yeah. So, you know, it turns out to be such a it's been a really interesting story, because, you know, I hear, you know, it's a tough topic, and we get to talk about organ donation, et cetera, but we also get people send us pictures you wouldn't believe, pictures you can't share with people. They're so crazy, but they've been up in rockets. They've been on North Pole, South Pole. I mean, there's a dot down here off of the coast of Antarctica. A friend of mine said, you know, hey, I wish I had one of those stones. I was there last week. And I said, you know, this was on St. George's Island. I said, you know what? There's one there on Shackleton's grave. And he went, really? He ran up, got his camera, and he had accidentally taken a picture of a sandstone without knowing it on the most remote part of the earth. But it turns out that this has been such a great connection and such a great thing to share. And even though it was really hard, and then what happened is I found the more that I leaned into fun, and that's where my Tesla obsession, I was going around at the time giving talks called High Tension on the life of Nikola Tesla. As part of that, people started to and the crazier I looked, people started to come to me and say, well, hey, can you make something for us? And it was interesting because one of the things, I am a big MIT fan. I don't know, can you see this? I'm part of a group called Vomit, Vermont's own MIT club. Can you see what I'm holding in my hand, Mark?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I can.
so this is a Vomit can opener. That's Vermont's own MIT club. It might be backwards. I don't know.
There you go. Now I'm seeing it the right way. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened is a group came to us and asked Vomit, the MIT grads in the state of Vermont, could you build something? They wanted to build something that was at least 7 meters tall and was designed to scare children as part of a fundraiser. And I thought, that's a great use of an engineering education. So we built this giant thing that goes from about 2 meters tall up to 7 meters tall. And it's wirelessly controlled so that you can, as you move your hands, it's not quite as direct as that, but you move these controllers, it moves its hands. As you talk, its giant mouth opens. And you could calculate how much, how did the little kids scream? Did the parents scream? Did they spontaneously wet their pants? It was a fabulous engineering decision. But the interesting thing is we built this with a bunch of students. And this was during one of the hardest times in my life. But I found that the more I actually shared the love of making things with other people, the better I felt. And I started doing that. I keep using the word I, but this is, there are teams of people out there because of things like the maker movement. And so this was another 7 meter tall, this was a device for carrying half naked hippies across the desert at a festival called Burning Man. This was something we made for Ben of Ben and Jerry's, who is in this picture somewhere. But it was basically a wirelessly controlled, the lights were wirelessly controlled. Somebody had to drive the thing, but it had a carousel with ski lifts on it, and it's still parked down the road actually. But again, 40 people, 40 days to put this thing there and then run it out in the desert. The more that we shared our passion for making things and the more personally I shared it, the more playful I felt and the more I felt back in the world. And what was so interesting, just to kind of put a coda on that, is that several years later, when my company decided to get into Internet of Things, which is basically computer chips, which I love, talking to computers, which I tolerate, they were asking for anybody, who had expertise in making wirelessly controlled things like that. Well, as it happened, when we were doing this, no one in the company really did that, but I showed them 7 meter tall robotic pumpkins and giant Ferris wheels, that I used to sort of glorify science in the desert with people. And they said, okay, you're hired. And so that basically I got a job for 2.5 years running our IoT business out of Munich. And my job was to take this beautiful building and make it into a giant IoT toy. So my job was to sort of take my credentials were the play things I had built, and my job was to play more. Now, it didn't always feel like play. I was living in northern Vermont where I am right now and commuting every other week to Munich. There were many aspects of that were playful, but lots that weren't. But it was really, when I look back on it, it was that. And ironically, it was there that I kind of fell in love with doing AI. And that's what got me this job. I've mentioned MIT several times, but we had in 2018, we started actually just before that, late 2017, we started a joint lab with MIT. I joined in late 2018, and it's basically a lab. It's a 10-year commitment where we work hand in hand with MIT people, some of the smartest and craziest, strangest, and playful people you could meet. Our mission there is to create the next generation of AI algorithms, to run AI on on new physics, like on quantum computers, to apply AI to different industries and stuff, and to make sure that AI is fair. But the basic thing is, it was me playing with AI when I should have been doing the IoT that got me this job. So it was kind of like a little bit of mischief that actually got me this job. So it was not, it's really, I know it sounds like a very convenient telling. And I've had people say, well, of course you can play because you're an IBM Fellow. And I was like, no, I'm an IBM Fellow because I keep doing this. Not every day, but most days. So I
Right.
think, you know, I can tell you a little bit about more mischief, but I should probably shut up, shouldn't I?
Not at all. I'm enthralled, and I'll tell you, our numbers have not fallen off on our crowd. So I think everybody's really enjoying this talk. I would love to pick your brain on AI a little bit, but I don't want to stop you from
No, go
talking
ahead.
more
I
about
think,
the
no,
mischief.
anything goes, man.
So when you mention Internet of Things and AI, so obviously it's a progression in your work, but for many of us, IoT we're just starting to open our eyes to the applications there. So for me, as a layman, the application of AI, I remember a year or two ago, I was talking to some of the incubators I work with in New York City, and I know that AI and startups is the next hot thing in market, but I just couldn't grasp. Well, what does it mean? And the way they explained it to me was, you met him, Steve Cohn out of NYU.
Oh, yeah.
He explained, if you look at a traditional market like a fintech market, layering AI to make to create efficiencies, that's what I heard, is how AI can start changing markets. But when you look to the future, there's got to be so much more. Where do you see it going?
Well, you know, I have to tell you, maybe a bit of curmudgeonly, is that I think you have to be really careful when, you know, the technology itself becomes the shiny, bright object. Because whenever that happens, you end up doing two things. You know, you get lovers and haters, you know, because it's the normal hype cycle, right? Look at whatever it's going to be, you know, big data. Blockchain is a great example. So blockchain is a fabulous technology for some things, but if you look at it where it is on the hype cycle, sorry about that, you know, if you're not careful, it becomes the answer to whatever question somebody asks, right? And that's never the right thing. You know, I think that what's really important is you understand the problem that you're, you know, and play is actually very much about, you know, recognizing a problem and going, or an opportunity and going, what if, or isn't that, or noticing something like you said before, isn't that strange? You know, that's one of the most, I don't remember who said the quote, but the biggest insights in inventing is not eureka. It's like, that's strange. I think you have to be very careful to say, you know, the next big thing. There is no the next big, well, sometimes there are new world-changing technologies. AI is layers of stuff. And I think what will happen is that we'll be able to, we now have a couple of, you know, AI's been around for 60 years. As a matter of fact, it was first mentioned, artificial intelligence, the first time that was documented was 1956, before I was born.
Right.
And it's been about to be the next big thing for several things. The thing that's different now is that in about, I'd say about 2012, so people had these ideas about how we might model, you know, animal brains using a bunch of little connected neurons. And then building a network of those, and then, you know, training them and using the relative connection strength between them as a way of recording something, you know, an aspect, and then treating and using machines like that to be able to differentiate between multiple different things, to do classifiers, to recognize, even to synthesize. That technology has been around for a long time. It wasn't until about the mid-2010s, 2012, people started using graphics processors. 2015, the first sort of really user-friendly open source software frameworks came out. And then it became, again, one of these technologies which is growing so fast that it became, because it's truly good. I mean, we are now, you know, for something that's kind of been latent for a long time, you know, every cell phone, you know, your assistant, your, you know, smart assistant, your phone, your browser, everything like that is using AI in kind of a narrow sense. It's doing superhuman recognition of, you know, visuals or voice, or maybe even sometimes movies. But it's a long way away from, you know, thinking or feeling or comprehending. And I think people make that leap that, you know, it is gonna change the world. And these technologies are really fundamentally different. But it's, it's not an end all be all kind of solution. I think the reason it's so exciting right now is because it becomes so easy to do because of the combination of having enough data, enough compute, and through the technical generosity of all sorts of companies, to have all of this open source frameworks that allow us to easily write, even people like me, to write AI. It's just creating a whole lot of opportunities for innovation. And I think the intersection between, say, you mentioned IoT, I think AI and IoT together, AI, is already making cars smarter. If you have a car that's got semi-automatic driving or autonomous driving, that's AI, of course.
Right.
If you have, there are many really, really useful kind of things, how airplanes take off land, how machines can sort of self-diagnose so that they get fixed before they break. At the same time, there's weird expectations that, hey, maybe your toaster should talk or something like that. There are good ideas and bad ideas, and just having a new shiny technology doesn't change it. But I think ultimately AI is going to make things better at interacting with humans, whereas a thing or a system of things can actually anticipate, human need and sort of, figure out how to protect us or delight us or entertain us, or optimize something we're doing, getting from place to place. So I think it's going to be steady growth in that. But it's definitely a cool technology. I just sometimes worry that we say, hey, AI is the answer. What's the question? I don't want to do that.
Well, so then I have to ask I guess a rough question, and you say it could protect us or enhance enhance our experiences. What about the fear that some people have that it'll control us in some way down the road?
Well, there are short-term fears and long-term fears. I think any technology, Mark, comes with trade-offs. I mean, Tesla, kind of dealt with this in his life. High voltage. If you think about it, when people started to use steam technology or electricity, or any sort of electricity or nuclear power, there are legitimate concerns of people's safety, right? Technology is neutral. It can be used for good or evil, right? And AI is clearly like that. So I recently served on an AI task force for the state of Vermont, which was really, really eye-opening because a lot of people came at it from a sense of fear. And, my instinct at first was that, there's obviously so much good. If you look at like air travel, and we're blurring the distinction between automation and where AI, there's not a bright line that says that's AI and that's not, or, numerical techniques. But you look at how many lives that saves, I would think that people would be more optimistic. But in the course of this task force, I really came to understand that people's concerns. I mean, while, down the road, if we're not careful, we might create situations where the technology gets away from us. And that's true in many types of technology. But I think that the actual things that we got to start doing now is to make sure that the technology right now is explainable. It can tell us why it's making those decisions. It's human mediated, so that the decisions we relegate to an AI or to a machine, that there's human intervention where necessary, that doesn't, that that's always a point. But I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to get an educated population so that people are having more nuanced conversation. AI good, AI bad. It's not like, I think that if we keep humans in the loop, we will then, I have no doubt that the net benefit will so outweigh those negatives. But those, concerns, and I would concentrate more on concerns, in the near term, about privacy and things like that.
Sure.
That if we can, as a society, decide what we really want and regulate ourselves and monitor and adjust, I think that we will over time, keep this genie in the bottle. I really do. And we've got a long time, when people talk about general AI and where that break point would be, I think that the sort of thinking right now is it's like, 2050. And when somebody tells you something's 2050, that means they don't know. So I'm not dismissive of that point at all, but I think now is the time to start having those conversations. And by building in things like security, explainability, and human mediation, I think we can make this work. But education is the main thing. And to be able to tell people how to make good technology choices, AI or otherwise, it could be any technology. But
Right.
not something that we really teach in schools. And I think that's something that we really got to teach at every layers. And there's no, kids are so technology competent right now, but they may or may not be making informed decisions about what information they allow a machine to, like a phone to take from them. I think
Right.
by informing them, we're on the right path.
That's a very good point. Before we move on to close, I would love to hear a little bit more about the mischief on play. I want to be respectful to some of the folks in our chat room who had a few questions, and I'd like to ask those questions. First, on a scale of magnitude, Watson, how much faster is Watson's that original Jeopardy circuit board that you had shared with us on one of the slides?
Well, Watson is more of a brand. It's a collection of AI tools. It's not a brain in a jar. It's a collection of tools that use a variety of things: machine learning, natural language processing. So it actually is misleading. There's no like one Watson computer. It's a bunch of techniques, and it's used in all sorts of technologies. Automotive, manufacturing, transportation, healthcare. But it's not, I don't think I can answer that question in the way it was asked, because it's not like it is getting faster. The techniques are getting faster, and through work that my company's done and through great contributions through open source all over the place. I would just say that that innovations in the software platforms, innovations in the compute platforms, in terms of the supercomputers that we have, and more importantly, innovations in the algorithmic, is we still don't have it completely right. Most of what we do for things, what's called machine learning, is pretty primitive. It's like supervised learning, where I have a ton of data and it's all labeled, cat, dog, and then you train on that. That's not the way that humans or animals actually learn. We're much more nuanced. We're able to infer things. We're able to bring experience from other situations in. We're able to apply reasoning and kind of symbolic reasoning. I think that there's a huge amount of innovation that's happening right now in what we call neurosymbolic, which is actually combining this neural network, sort of modeling the brain, with the ability to do sort of reasoning and question answering. I think that we're going to see huge advances algorithmically in that are going to do more than the speed of the chip. So I think the way that we actually formulate, put it this way, a supercomputer like the one that we operate at MIT, the Satori computer, that takes about, somewhere between 100 and 200,000 watts to do a certain calculation, a pretty complicated mathematical computation. When it's working at full bore, it's not apples and apples, but our brains do incredibly complex things, and they're using tens of watts. So we know that there's a lot of room in there for improvement. And I think that's where I'm more excited, is about the improvements in the software modeling. And I would say that we're, when I think about Watson being 2011, we're several orders of magnitude beyond the capabilities of the time then.
So there's a lot of questions on AI, but just to change it up a little bit, and for the folks that are asking questions, if we don't get to all of them, we will have Dr. Cohn answer them after the show, and we'll make sure that we include it in the show's notes, question and answer. But there was a question, and this is a Tesla Unwired program, and that's what brought us together. What has inspired you? What Tesla inventions made you a fan of Nikola Tesla, or somebody that appreciated his work?
Well, there was no one invention. He was a complicated guy. He was a great inventor. He was kind of a bad businessman. He was kind of a, huckster, but incredibly innovative. What I really liked was his playful spirit. There's stories, if you go and look, how he would actually, he famously made a merry-go-round with bugs. He was always trying things. And I think the thing that really got me hooked, I spend a lot of time talking to kids about science, and especially because I look like a scientist. So I do a lot of work with I do things called volts and jolts, so microvolts to megavolts. And I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have several Tesla coils. I've got this one that my friend Scott and I made. This is my coil Eugene that was made for me by a friend of mine in Ukraine. This is 1 Tesla that was done by a company out of MIT. This is a kind of a mud bucket one that Scott and I built. This is a vacuum tube one that I found at my son found at a garage sale for me. So I think that you know, the playful spirit, when you blow stuff up safely, of course, or make giant sparks, it really gets a kid to lean in. And I think actually getting people to lean into technology, to say, you know, like we were just talking about with AI, you have to learn how to make it interesting enough. You can't just preach to somebody. You have to get them to be curious and ask questions. And I think the thing that was so cool about, you know, when I was turned on to Tesla at a young age, I really liked anything he made with big sparks. So whether it was induction coils or Tesla coils or his radio transmission stuff, you know, I was hooked. And I think the main thing that he brought to that was this sort of spirit of, you know, trial and error, and a fearless trial and error, which is just applied play.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So, you know, we're an hour in. We can go for a while. I'd like to hear a little bit more on the mischief with play, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, I think the main thing about, I think the main tool, you had asked about the tools. I think the main tool was this notion of sort of self-moderation, that when things, and I'll tell you what, today is a great day for me to be saying this because I'm pretty stressed out because of some things going on at work. And what you have to be able to do is that applied mischief is applied play. But what you have to do is have that little barometer in your life when things are just over the top, that when you're committed 150%, that you carve some time away. So, you know, while I was supposed to be working on IoT in Germany, I started doing an AI project. Okay, and when I'm doing an AI project, I ended up doing, you know, some mischief. Let me show you something that you guys can play with yourself. This is a, let me start by, well, actually, share my screen. That might actually be easier. What I was, is this gonna work? Hello. Let's see here. Excuse me. Oh, there it is. So if you look up, are you able to, you're not able to see this yet?
No.
Okay, here you go. So let me, one of the things as I was trying to get, you know, I was working on this AI task force, I realized that we didn't have enough tools to get, and I use the word tools in a very loose sense. I found that people were not having nuanced conversations about the technology, so that people came at it either from a point of fear or a point of hype. And I was really struck by the fact that when we would talk to students, there are certainly some students who sort of self-select, but most students just didn't think it was for them. So I really wanted to work on something that would help people think that, you know, kind of lean into it, as I said, and sort of show them that technology can be fun, interesting, and actually transparent. So I started creating, I worked with, I did a first prototype, and it actually has a Tesla connection. And then I worked with my friend Va. So if you go to ibm.biz, so ibm.biz/Veramen, that's V as in Victor, E-R-E-M as in Mary, I-N as in Nancy. So it's like a theremin. Are you familiar with the
Yes.
So Veramen is a visual theremin. So what I wanted to do is show that you could use AI. Specifically, I'm using something called TensorFlow that Google developed. It's open source. And I use a model on TensorFlow that takes tens of thousands of pictures of people moving around. Are you able to see my kind of the blue lines that are following my body?
Yes.
So basically what it's doing is I can download that same thing runs fine on my, you know, runs the same on my phone as it runs on a laptop. And if you remember, if you can send that out, ibm.biz it works the same here. It basically takes this model called PoseNet, and it uses a nice tool called TensorJS to actually run it on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer. And what it's doing is it's taking my so it's making somewhat beautiful music by fitting the shape of, it's just looking at the camera. It's doing all the calculation, you know, either on the computer or in the browser or on my phone. It does the same thing, Android, iOS, tablets. And basically, it translates that into musical notes. Now, I don't have time to demonstrate that directly because I think it would, it takes a little bit of kind of futzing around to do it, but it's also a MIDI controller. And if I can, are you able to see? So here's me playing it. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Well, I can hook that up to my Tesla coil, Eugene.
So is that almost like a singing Tesla coil, and you're?
It is very much like a singing Tesla coil. As a matter of fact, it's the closest thing to a singing Tesla coil as you can get, except for perhaps. That is the real thing.
That is the real thing. No speakers needed.
No, actually, it's my ears are ringing. It's louder than you think. But I think the whole idea is, why do I do crazy stuff like that? You know, you always have to be safe and appropriate. Oh my God, something's on fire. I'm not kidding. Oh well. Never a dull moment. We'll figure that out. Smoke somewhere. Oh well. Can't have been anything important. But I think the idea of being able to show that you can use serious technology and have fun with it is a great way to motivate other people, and it's a great way to actually get yourself out of a rut. So whatever you love doing, and I don't care if it's, you know, law or whatever, writing, tennis playing, you know, when you get into a rut, when you get into a bind, when things are hard, it sounds like a song, but then I think you just got to kind of hide what you're doing, kind of, and then mess around. And, you know, maybe 1 time out of 10, it will come out with a fabulous invention. But those other 9 times are great insights, and they get you out of your rut.
So I think this is a great place for us to conclude. I know that you have a busy day at work, and you literally have to go put out some fires. But and any other parting advice, or can we bring you back on again and have you put on a theremin concert one time?
Yes, actually, you know, I have a friend. I just made a friend at the Media Lab that is actually using a theremin to modulate poetry, and that's going to be one of the projects that I want to try to emulate. But
please keep us apprised of that.
Yeah. I'm loving. I didn't even see these comments. Wow, look at these. These are fun.
We can't, everybody's been just so impressed. The ability to just describe the importance of play in our work.
And I'll tell you what, there's no better time to play, and there's no better time to be a nerd.
I like it. So thank you so much. We'll definitely be in touch very shortly. For those watching, we will be able to answer your questions and put them into the comments for the show. And please join us next time, June 30th. We have someone from Dr. Cohn's neck of the woods, or at least from the MIT area, Miles Chilson.
Thank you.
A serial entrepreneur and is the president of the Northeast chapter of the Tesla Motors Club. So thank you for joining us, and until next time.
All right. Be safe. Be safe.
Thank you, everybody. And we will have a recording of this online as well. And before we go, I just want to show my picture that I have. If you guys look at me, You can see my sandstone that I took the picture of. It's on one of the keystones at Tesla Science Center. Doug, can you make my screen bigger? I'm not as tech savvy as you guys, but there it is. And it's on one of the keystones on the tower base right in front of the laboratory.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, I have a question. Is it just us now?
Nope, we still have everybody with us.
Nice.
So we're going to end this now, and thank you all for coming. And we'll have that video of this whole recording on our website.
Thank you very much, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks, Dr. Cohn.